Do you remember that Goldilocks story from when you were a kid? You know, the one where she tries the porridge that's too hot and the porridge that's too cold. And finally she finds the porridge that's just the right temperature. Or if you're into philosophy, you might recall that Aristotle talks about virtue this way, as being the mean between two extremes. If you start thinking about your violin playing like that Goldilocks principle of not too much, not too little, but just right, this will actually transform your tone on the violin, especially when it comes to using the bow. So in this particular video, we're going to be talking about how to play with your bow in the right position, and the biggest challenge that I see amongst beginner and sometimes advanced students too, and this was totally true for me, how to play with a straight bow. Among beginner students, I see actually three things often happen. One is playing over the fingerboard. The second is playing too close to the bridge. And the third is having your bow go back and forth between the two extremes, sounding like this. And it's just traveling back and forth, losing clarity and losing focus the whole way. So instead, I want you to imagine that you have a point right here, and you can even turn your violin around and look at it. See this point right here that represents the midpoint between the edge of the fingerboard and your bridge. And so if you put your finger there, imagine don't actually do this, but imagine you put a marker on that spot. And so you're going to put your violin up where it goes, making sure that your head's not this way to look at the strings. And imagine where that point is. Now you're going to put your bow down on that point, right at the frog. Challenge yourself to always do these exercises with a whole bow, not just a little tiny bit of bow. And play from the very frog to the point on that exact spot, not letting your bow travel back and forth. Better. So if you were someone who was playing a little bit over here, a little bit too far this way, did you hear an immediate improvement in your sound? Feel free to let me know in the comments. But here's the second part of this video, which is about playing with a straight bow. Now, this is actually really difficult. If you are struggling with this, you are not alone, because every single beginner I have ever started on the violin at any age from this tall, oh, you can't see, from 3 years old all the way through older adults has had a difficult time playing with a straight bow. And even some advanced players that I've worked with still have a difficult time keeping that bow straight. So here's how you're going to play with a straight bow. The main principle that's going to help us is looking at your bridge. So in order to play with a straight bow, you want your bow to stay exactly parallel with your bridge. So here's the exercise we're going to do. I want you to be standing in front of a mirror. Your scroll is level with your nose. Okay, so this is really important, because if we practice all these angles but your violin is in like a weird droopy position, then you're going to learn all the angles wrong. So make sure that your violin is all the way up on your shoulder and your scroll is level with your nose and all these things, and that your violin isn't way out here. It's 45 degrees left of the center of your body. And then you're going to turn your body, scooching all the way this way so that your violin is now facing that wall. So now you're making a 90-degree angle between the mirror, or in this case the camera, and your scroll. So you've got this 90-degree angle going. Now you can put your your bow on your violin and turn your head a little bit to look and see in the mirror if your bow is straight. Now we can do this exercise. So we're going to start with your bow right at the frog, and I want you to watch in the mirror to make sure that as you go from the frog to all the way to the point, that your bow stays exactly parallel with the bridge. Let's try. Okay, if you you didn't give that a try, go ahead and pause the video and give that a try and come back, because this is really the exercise that completely transformed my ability to play with a straight bow. And I was already playing much more advanced pieces. I might have even been playing Preludium and Allegro by the time that I actually really fixed the straight bow problem. And it completely changed my tone on the violin. And so I want this for you too. So please try this in front of a mirror for the best results, and use your whole bow from the frog all the way to the point. Now, as you did that exercise, you may have noticed something kind of interesting. When you have your bow at the frog, do you notice that my hand, my wrist is actually a little bit turned this way? Which is kind of funny because we don't do that with the other wrist, right? But only when we're at the frog. It doesn't actually make sense to have your elbow up here or to have your bow be really crooked in order to keep all of this straight. So this is one of those unusual exceptions where it's okay to have a sort of non-neutral position. It's okay for this to be a little bit curved in, and that will help you achieve that straight bow at the frog. But then as you go down to the middle, stop for a second with your bow in the middle. And I want you to think about how you have a right angle created now, and your elbow is no further back on your body than, say, about the midpoint. If this is, say, the midpoint of your body, your elbow isn't any further back than that. So you've created this right angle in the middle. Now, as you go toward the point, something totally different happens in the way that you feel that straight bow. You might have noticed that it feels like you're pushing your hand forward in front of you. It's almost like your hand stops here, it makes that right angle, and then you feel as if you're going forward with your hand. Your hand literally moves in front of you this way, and that's what keeps that bow straight because of the angles of how we play the violin. So from the middle to the point, as you get to the point, your hand is moving further this way. The most common beginner mistake is at the point to have your elbow back here behind the midpoint of your body. Try this exercise for 1 to 2 minutes a day. Start with the whole bows with that straight bow with just open strings, and then start adding the scales to it so that you're practicing additional technique. There's one more point about playing with the bow that really fits this idea of the Goldilocks principle. So I'm going to give it to you as a bonus. I've noticed some students play and it sounds also kind of scratchy because they're just pressing too hard. And then other students I have maybe are worried about that scratchy sound when they press too hard, so they go too far in the other direction and barely touch the string. Now, sometimes we want to play piano, we want things to be soft no matter where we are in the bow, even if we're not at the point, but to have that clean focus sound, let's think about that Goldilocks principle here too. Instead of pressing too hard or barely touching the string, we're going to go for something in the middle. One visual hook to think about this, because I often think just having the right visual picture sometimes helps us to achieve the result we're looking for in a much better way. One thing that a wonderful violinist told me once was, he said, I want you to imagine that you're playing with your bow as if your bow were a knife cutting into a warm stick of butter. So, you know, if you have it sitting out on the table and it's had a chance to get to room temperature and you put a knife in it, well, that knife just basically cuts really easily through the butter, right? It goes right through. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it. You just use sort of the weight of your arm. And the weight of your arm and your hand and the weight of the knife itself is plenty good enough to cut through that butter. So what if you take that mental image now and apply it to the amount of weight that you're putting on your bow. See if those 3 things now actually completely transform the way you play the violin.